Welcome back. After the stunning collapse of Syria's Assad regime, concerns are now being raised over the rebel army's Islamist roots. Trump reacting to the escalating conflict in Syria, saying, quote, "This is not our fight," and that the U.S. should stay out. Here with reaction to the latest Middle East shakeup, we have former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense under Trump, Elbridge Colby. Elbridge, so great to have you on the program this afternoon. You know, with Trump saying this is not our fight, be that as it may, I think we do acknowledge that there's a new regime taking hold of Syria that has ties to a terrorist network, Al-Qaeda. I wonder, is there anything that we should be concerned about as there's now kind of a struggle for reordering? You know, how should, if we stay out of it, how should Trump and his new administration, at a minimum, monitor what is developing there?
Well, great to be with you all. And I think President Trump is absolutely right to say that we should stay out of it. I think what he meant was stay out of a direct intervention. I don't understand. I don't speak for him, but I don't understand him to be saying that we shouldn't be monitoring it. I mean, obviously, President Trump ran on protecting the American people first and foremost in our homeland. And a critical part of that is monitoring threats from abroad, including jihadis who are involved in various ways in this very difficult and tragic civil war. But I think the core common sense. But common sense in this age is kind of uncommon, so it's sort of brilliant. The common sense at the core of what President Trump is saying is we can't and we don't need to try to solve all the world's problems. And after 25 years of trying, hopefully we've gotten the memo that we're not necessarily going to succeed, and it's not really worth the American people's hard-earned treasure and blood. And I think that's the logic. I don't see him to be saying do nothing. And I think it's important. This is another example of where our allies in the region, like Israel, for instance, moving to go after Syria's chemical weapons programs, to seize Mount Hermon. You know, I don't think that's something that we can't encourage. You know, we can support that. I mean, obviously, we don't have to get deeply involved, but that's a positive step here.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about Israel, because this is on their doorstep, and they do have a vested interest.
Right.
And they're moving assets into the region. As you said, they're attacking chemical plants. How should the United States in this new era, what does it mean for the U.S. to support Israel as they work in that neighborhood and try to bring at least a modicum of peace for them, but maybe beyond just Israel as well?
Well, look, I think we should applaud and honor what Israel's been able to do after the tragedy of October 7th, which has totally turned the tables on the threat, not just from Hamas, but from Lebanese Hezbollah and Iran itself. And now the Assad government, which had been part of that Iranian axis of resistance, has fallen apart. And that's not because of Joe Biden. Let's be very clear. That's because of Israel and other things going on. Obviously, Turkey's played a role, the Gulf states. But I think this is an excellent opportunity to leverage what President Trump ran on, which is, you know, let's have allies, but let's have allies who do their part. And let's have allies who understand that, you know, they're going to be primarily responsible often for what's in their neighborhood. He said, I think over the weekend on NBC that, you know, for instance, in the case of Ukraine, this is something that's Europe's, you know, directly concerns Europe. Obviously, it matters to the United States, but countries that are willing and able to step up. And I think Israel is really a model example of that. And I think that's, again, not speaking for him, but I think that's the kind of model that President Trump can offer. And it's good news. I mean, there's been this idea that President Trump's going to be bad for our alliances, and we see that being disproved all over the place, for instance, here in the case of Israel.
You talked about Ukraine, so let's go there. If Russia is a little bit on their back foot now when it comes to Syria, are they more likely to do a deal with Ukraine? And is Ukraine more likely to do a deal with Russia?
Well, I think you kind of see the shoots of peace breaking out. You saw President Trump have the meeting, you know, with President Macron and President Zelensky of Ukraine. Interest there, people understanding that the war, you know, has to come to an end. But also signals from Russia, from President Putin himself, from people like Lavrov and Peskov, that the Russians are open to negotiation. So I think that's very encouraging. You have this sort of pathetic spectacle of Biden sort of shoveling the few weapons we have left in our inventory out the door in a futile effort to turn the tide when the Ukrainians are not doing very well, unfortunately. But I think there's interest, hopefully, on both sides. And look, the Russian economy is not doing very well. The Russians are, you know, they're making progress. They have the upper hand, but they've faced real difficulties. As President Trump pointed out, they've lost a lot of people. Things are not going well in Syria. They're kind of under the thumb of China. So I think a new approach like what President Trump is talking about could be very promising. It just needs to be grabbed by somebody who commands respect and who can talk to our rivals like Putin or Xi Jinping, as President Trump can, as opposed to just calling them names.
Elbridge, there were some reports that your name was being circulated on lists for potential appointments for this second Trump administration. Have you had any recent conversations with the Trump transition team on how you could serve?
Well, look, I make no presumptions. I'm a huge supporter of President Trump and his administration, and I wanted to succeed. I think it's been really exciting to see people like Pete Hegseth, Marco Rubio, Tulsi Gabbard, Stephen Miller, Chris Landau, Mike Needham, et cetera, people who are obviously clearly committed to putting President Trump's actual America First foreign policy into effect. Again, I make no presumptions, but if I could contribute in some way that would make a difference, I'd be honored to do so.
All right, Elbridge, Colby, thank you very much for your time this afternoon.